Thank you, Supreet. Good afternoon to all my fellow panelists. Greetings to you on the occasion of the World Skill Day. Let me use my 5-6 minutes to essentially lay out what I believe will be the sort of the emerging world of skilling. Before I do that, let me step back and first take you through what was the sort of the or what were the key elements of the vision that the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship had drawn up as our sort of expectations for the 2025 sort of 5-year period. Now, remember, this is the pre-COVID world, and we had done an elaborate exercise, and some of you were a part of that. I'm thankful for your participation. We were funded by Omidyar Network, and we had some excellent private sector consultants who assisted us summarize the 4 or 5 key elements on which the 2025 skilling program was going to be based are A, much greater emphasis on apprenticeship than before. To an audience like this, I don't need to sort of emphasize this point. The importance of learning by doing and learning by doing at the workplace is, I think, the heart of skilling as distinct from education. So, the first point in our vision 2025 was the additional importance to be attached to apprenticeship. It is not as if apprenticeship was not important in the Indian ecosystem. The act is 1961. The legislative act goes back to 1961. But for a variety of reasons, apprenticeship is still a very, very small part of the skilling ecosystem in terms of numbers. So both the number and quality of apprenticeship had to increase. Number two, given the importance of the informal and the MSME sector in the Indian economy, the vision found that skilling exercise were not proportionately in commensurate in commensuration with this importance. What do I mean by that? I mean that a lot of our skilling activity was geared towards the more organized, more formal organizations and companies, whereas given that a bulk of India's workforce and a large part of India's GDP comes from MSMEs and very often entities that are not entirely formal, the skilling ecosystem had to sort of come to tune with this reality, and skilling had to be a lot more in these enterprises and for these enterprises. This is broadly point two. The broad point three is that education and skilling needed much greater integration. In other words, a bulk of the employers are telling us that rather than focus on domain skills, please teach these kids what we call foundational or life skills, and a lot of the domain skills will be taught by the employer at the workplace, but to send a relatively well groomed, smarter, linguistically, arithmetically better trained child was child is the wrong word, perhaps trainee is the requirement of the sort of the sector broadly. So to quickly summarize, emphasis on apprenticeship, focus on informal as well as MSME, greater integration with education are the three big parts of Vision 2025 of skilling. Remember in the background that skilling, like basic education, has characteristics which in economics, in public economics, would be called a merit good. It has a lot of externalities, or to avoid using the jargon, a lot of spillover benefits beyond the person being trained or skilled. And two, a bulk of India's skilling sort of constituency, the constituency that goes for skilling. This is perhaps true of the rest of the world, but very true of India. A bulk of this constituency was the relatively poor and the vulnerable. With this background, what is it that we see in the emerging post-COVID world? Post-COVID world and the response of the government thereto combined are going to create a much more Atmanirbhar Bharat. Namely, I think there will be a greater focus looking inward. That's the general change in the economy and society that we need to keep in mind. Number two, the platforms and IT-based aggregators have, I think, tremendously gained in importance. We've seen pre-COVID the rise of the Ubers and the rise of the the shared transportation mechanisms, Ola and things like that. But the Uberization and the Olaization of the economy that was happening in a small way is now, I think, the equivalent of an economic pandemic. Aggregators and IT platforms will increase in numbers and hugely increase in importance. And three, like we are doing today, we are seamlessly integrating with each other, essentially in a virtual manner, much less in a physical manner. So if we take these three trends and if we take the three vision elements for Skilling 2025, what is my vision of what post-COVID skilling will look like? And Supreet, I'll just take a minute and a half to say this. Number one, people generally are going to have much less disposable income, and hence the vulnerable and the poor, who are our constituency for skilling, will require a lot more support of the government for skilling. This is coming at a
Sir, I have a
time when,
request. You could not be heard for past 15 seconds.
okay, shall I
If
repeat?
that can be repeated, sir.
Yeah. So I had touched upon the three characteristics of the post-COVID society. Prior to that, I had elaborated on the three elements of the pre-COVID skilling mission. I am now combining the two and will very quickly, in about a minute, summarize my vision of the post-COVID skilling scenario. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So, number one, people are likely to have less disposable income and therefore dependence on government funded schemes, CSR schemes, that is, schemes funded by means other than their own income, are going to be even more important than before. That's broadly one sort of requirement that public policy needs to keep in mind. Number two, as far as the elements are concerned, is apprenticeship going to be less important? No. If anything, it's going to be more important. Are informal MSME sectors of the economy going to be less important? They are going to struggle a lot more, but I think they are going to be even more important than before, because a bulk of us have also begun to shop much more domestically, locally in the neighborhood. The challenge, however, is going to be how do we plug these guys with the emerging other forces of this economy? Three, is integration with education going to be less important? No, I think that's going to be as important as before. What are the changes? I think the changes are going to be, in addition to the fact that public support in terms of income slash expenditures for meeting the skill programs will be required. I see two essential things. Number one, there will be, as was mentioned by my preceding speaker, a lot more skilling to be delivered virtually. but this is a very, very strong challenge because the importance of skilling is learning by doing, not learning by watching, not learning by listening. So I think augmented reality, virtual reality, whatever we have, will need to be pressed into service to create a lot more domestically relevant content for India to keep up the spirit of learning by doing, ideally, learning by doing at the workplace. Number two, we are going to be doing a lot more decentralized training because I think physical centers are going to be difficult to operate for a while. And I think the economics of a physical center is also going to be in doubt. Decentralized provision is going to be important. And I think the migrant story has driven home this point. There will be a lot more skilling at source rather than destination. My concluding point is that in addition to skilling, as we discovered in round one, increasingly combining elements of entrepreneurship with skilling is going to be extremely important because we will see a huge increase in self employment in the upcoming Indian economy, a lot less organized formal employment. So, to summarize, methodology of delivery will need to change. Income support slash expenditure support for programs will need to continue, but the emphasis or the elements that constituted the vision of skilling pre-COVID will continue, if anything, even more strengthened. Thank you, Supreet. I think that's an excellent summary, I think, of all that people said. I think the clear sort of emphasis will be on continued dialogue with the private sector, but in today's circumstance, I think even more essential for both, because we are at a situation where both are working with balance sheets that are badly hit. Government balance sheets have taken a big hit, and private sector balance sheets have taken even a bigger hit. But we both need to come out of this without workers and potential workers suffering. So I think at one level you hit the nail on the head. Continuous dialogue with the counterpart private sector to figure out new, innovative, inexpensive ways to do this will be the way forward. And I think if I can take one more minute, introducing flexibility in a lot of legislations that are otherwise very rigid is going to be important, because it's going to be very difficult for people to meet with a lot of those legal obligations in the act in terms of levels of wages, in terms of rigidity of 8-hour schedules and things like that. But on the basic understanding that basic worker health, safety, and training is not compromised, I think there needs to be a lot more flexibility. That's the only thing I'd like to add. Thank you. I think it was an excellent conversation.